Hello and welcome to another episode of Pokémath. My name is Stefan Eriksson, and in today's episode I am joined by no other than Azul Garcia. Good morning, Azul, or good evening in your place.
Yeah. How's it going, Stefan? It's good to be here.
Thank you very much for joining. It's going really well, and it's quite interesting times and everything. We got a new season ahead of us. We just started. The few first regionals have been kicked off, and a new system is in place. I think that is the main interesting thing, right?
Yeah, definitely. And we've seen it's interesting because I haven't been to any majors yet myself. Stepping a little bit back from that at the beginning of this season, but I'm like sitting there, I'm like restreaming all the events and like watching them and then following along on Pokédata and just like watching how the tournaments are developing as we get towards the asymmetrical cut and being like that's like the big change for the players at the tournaments. Of course, outside of that, there's like all the point structure changes, but
Of course.
at the tournaments, it's the now X and 2 makes day 2, and then when we get close to the end of day 2, how is it breaking down? And the thing that I'm excited for is I just want to see as many people in cut as possible because that makes the most interesting tournament. So I'm always rooting for any kind of ties or people choosing to ID maybe when they shouldn't to end up with as big of a cut as possible.
So, but so you really want to see that happening? I can hear you really want to see that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had 14 at Dortmund, and then recently there was like I like looking at the potential, like some of the tournaments, like the one that happened recently, the special event in Lima. I think there was potential for 12, and then it ended up being just a clean 8 top cut. So it's interesting how it can go, get pretty wide or end up pretty narrow, depending on what the players choose to do in that last round.
Yeah, and you got like a really good point of view this time. Like you were not been at the event, but you could really observe everything that happened thanks to Pokédata and other sources because this makes it really us able to see what's going on. And I've been on the floor myself as a judge for Dortmund as well, but I was down in junior seniors. But there we see a similar thing going on in terms of how big the cut can be. And we had the potential for having 16, 17 people in a cut at some point. If there would have fallen a tie or two more, it was getting really, really interesting at some point. And of course, just like you, I will find that super interesting to see this massive cut going on. From time point of view, we were happy enough with having, I think in one division we have 10 and the other one 11, so that's okay. Or was it 9 or 10? In any case, very little compared to no clean cuts. But there's another effect that also happened a lot. So for people who've been living under a rock for a while, right? Everybody heard now Azul talk about we have an asymmetric cut. We now have, in general, less Swiss rounds. So we actually play more closer to true Swiss. Or is it true Swiss or true Swiss plus one Azul?
We're on True Swiss now, I believe. Yeah,
right.
But we were before. I think we were on True Swiss plus one, or it was even like True Swiss plus 2 in day 2, I guess, for some scenarios.
Yeah,
but we're in a.
And that was why I was a little shaky upon, like, was it a plus 1 or plus 2? But indeed, you're probably right that in the day 2 it was actually different. And now we see these tournaments where people think like, oh my god, I don't play that much. And for most events, I think the standard now is, given the size of the events, that for Masters at least, 8 rounds day 1 seems to be the norm. We may hit events that later will give us 9 rounds, but I believe we have to go above 4,000 players to reach that. To reach the 9 rounds day 1. Otherwise, we play 8 rounds and then a few rounds on the second day. Typically, 3 or 4.
It's what 2,048 for the 9 rounds day 1.
You're absolutely correct. And then the extra round on day 2 when you hit 4,000 mark, right?
Yeah, that's when you get the 5 rounds day 2.
Exactly. And then we get up to something that we've been, that looks familiar for some people who've been out playing major events for the last couple of years. 9 plus 5, or we even used to have 9 plus 6, if I'm not mistaken here.
9 really plus 6 when we hit. I forgot how many we needed in day 2. I think it was maybe. Yeah, what do we even need to hit to get 6 rounds day 2? I forget.
That was 800. Only 800.
That's all we needed. Yeah. It was just 800 players day 1.
Yeah, it was not even that big, so it was just a given. At least for all US regionals, it was just a given that you played 9 plus 6. But something that's happening right now, which is very interesting, is that, of course, we see a lot of these gentlemen's agreements. And I'm aware that you and Chip have already talked far and wide about gentlemen's agreements. And what we can observe is that it happens a lot more, and even in round 1. At least from a judge perspective, I can only say a few things about that because I'm not sitting in Masters for the last event. But The idea is you do get these very awkward situations as most. Fortunately, most of the things are just resolved before it becomes even a problem, and people they know how to react, and it all works out. But we do in general just have many more of these gentlemen's agreements, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, what do you think about that? Just briefly, Azul.
I think it is inherently a bad thing because it's like it's putting more pressures on the players, putting more pressure on the players to do something that is not just playing the game of Pokemon. Sort of force these, and it's not forced. Like you don't have to make gentlemen's agreements, but like
Of
it
course
is
not.
optimal. Like I haven't fully thought it through, but I'm pretty sure it's like if your goal is to progress as far as possible in the tournament, I'm pretty sure it's just optimal to make gentlemen's agreements from round one. Like the potential of a tie is just not worth it. Like if you're assuming, which is like if you're a competitive player trying to do well, you want to assume you're the better, more prepared player. It doesn't matter who you sit across from, right? You can sit across from Tor, but you still want to assume that. So with that in mind, you want to kind of play as much Pokemon as possible and actually getting value out of your game threes, even if they don't finish, because you made a gentleman's agreement that would then give you the win, becomes all of a sudden worth it to make the gentleman's agreements as soon as round one, because the chance that you actually end up with, because to progress to day two, you need X and two, and then
Yeah.
top cuts so far have everyone who's made X and two at the end of day two has made cut. I'm pretty sure at every single regional so far. At the Lima special event, we
Yeah.
just saw one player sneak in at eighth with X2 1, but everyone with X2 did make it, which is like I do like about the new system as long as that remains true. And I
Yeah.
actually think that should be what we determine top cut on. To be honest, it shouldn't be top eight or everyone with the same amount of points as someone in top eight. It should be X and two. I feel like
You're
everyone.
on a
It's
really
just
good point here. So first and foremost, I agree with you. I think it's inherently bad for the game, but that aside, you're onto something really interesting here when you say X and two, because as long as that is true, we have a system that can be somewhat better than where we were heading before. What do I mean by that?
yeah.
I mean, like in the previous system, the tournaments were getting too big for the system in the sense that you could progress with 19 points, and you could theoretically reach a moment now where we couldn't reach cut anymore, where you couldn't reach cut even if you progressed to day two. And then we have the whole discussion: should you be allowed to continue playing if your chance of winning the event is gone? And currently, that is not the case with the new system, as is that when you progress with X2, you can just win out, quote, quote, just win out. Then you can still progress to top cut, which I still think gives this, like, if you're in day two, you're still in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And that doesn't mean that people have tried to fix a few things. And let's start with, actually, let's start here. Suppose we're sitting in the last round of Swiss, and winner goes to top cut, loser do not. And if we were tied, we both would end in outside top cut still, but fair and square. The problem we see now is if we're sitting in a win and in situation, and I lose the game to you, I may drop all the way down out of top 32. That means out of significant pricing.
Yeah.
And we've seen that over and over again, actually. And that was not something we saw in the previous system because, well, there was simply just more points because there's more rounds, meaning that, you wouldn't drop that far down. You may at worst
Yeah.
drop out of top 16, but you would still be in the money, so to speak. What is your
Yeah,
take
you'd
on
usually
this
end.
part? Yeah.
Yeah, in the old system, you'd usually, if you lost a win and end, you wouldn't go further than top 32. I think it might have been different at like the biggest events of the year. Like
Mm-hmm.
NAIC we maybe had people losing the win and then
Yeah.
dropping out of top 32. Definitely, like I think everyone who lost a win in to top eight probably did not get top 16.
No,
In
I think
most of
that's
the
pretty
biggest
sure.
events.
But it was pretty safe to assume, at least for standard regional, that if you lost top, you're winning in. You were safe for top 32, and you may even still reach top 16, which was still a good result, of course, of course.
Yeah, which is also like another feels bad. Like there's like like I said, it's pretty like as far as I can tell, it's optimal to offer the gentleman's agreement as soon as round one of day one,
Mm-hmm.
because the chance that you end up with three ties to kind of make up for that and not take a loss is like unlikely. So like being able to get value out of as much of your gameplay as possible, maximize your potential point returns on your gameplay, even if it isn't completing a full game, kind of makes sense. But that feels bad, right? You're not. It's not nothing to do with playing the game of Pokemon. It's like another layer to tournaments
Yeah.
that generally it seems like the player base doesn't like, right? And we could even like put another thing that you can kind of point to it that would just be like the time rules, how it feels like for the current way that the Pokemon TCG is played, we are entering a decent amount of games where 3 games don't finish, let alone sometimes 2, with like decks like Gardevoir or
Hmm.
like Stall. And Stall and Control are a little bit different because they're people like go into it not knowing they're probably not going to finish their games. But decks like Gardevoir or Lost Box feels pretty bad to
Yeah.
like have to like concede that it's going to be a 1 game series off the rip. So whenever there's like factors that don't involve playing the Pokemon TCG like that, or like this new gentleman's agreement system, it feels bad. So generally, I feel like it is a bad thing that this is like kind of a byproduct of the system that we've now switched to, which is like the true Swiss system.
Yeah.
And then yeah, for cut, it's kind of the same thing where it's like if the players are really competitive, they generally just care about winning. I would say the prize money or the winning the tournament means more to them than the prize money. So they're going to want to still make a gentleman's agreement in that win and in situation, because the tie would leave them both in 16 or 32, but they would rather see someone from that set progress. And ideally they want it to be them. So that like sets themselves up to potentially be that,
Hmm.
be progressing into the tournament. But it does create kind of the same situation where, and like almost in reverse, where some players knowing that if they lose
Yeah.
they won't actually end up getting prize money, they would prefer to just tie the scenario instead, which means that we have players like almost purposely not trying to have games or matches conclude even potentially, right?
Yeah.
Which is also bad. Like they don't even want, they're like going to game 3, they're like, well, there's not a lot of time left, I'm fine if this just ties, I don't care if I win or I don't care
Yeah.
if I win, I'm fine with the tie because I just want to end up in prize money, and because losing means I don't get any prizes. Sure, winning is cool, but like it's almost like there's a fear of like losing that last round now because you'll fall out of prize money, which is
Yeah.
bad. We should want both players to feel comfortable to want to just give their all to try and win the tournament, right? It's like a competition at the end of the day. So that
You are
feels
on
bad,
money. Yeah.
for sure. So I think the best answer I've seen for this so far is like match point, tying prize payouts to match points, which I
Yeah.
think should be pretty reasonable to like standardize like across the board, and like based on like kickers based on like how many attendance there are.
That is definitely a solution. And I have 3 small patches you could do, and I just want to hear your. And I didn't put in one of these, but I also think this is a really good way to do it. It may be slightly more involved than other suggestions, but it definitely is doable. I would say that tying prices to match points and stuff like that, so you reach a certain bar. But I could imagine that from Pokemon's point of view, they would like to know a fixed amount of prize money going out for each event. Not sure, and assuming that, let's just assume that for a moment. Like, it's not a question about whether Big Pikachu has enough money or not. I think that's not a
Yeah.
question. There's enough money to go around, but I could see from their accounting point of view, they know we have this many regionals and this much prize money, and that's fixed. They want to have that fixed because that makes sense. So keep that in mind, and I'm gonna shoot 3 tweaks at you, and I would like to hear like just a yes or no and a very short explanation why you believe so, and whether it's good
All
or
right.
bad. So you already discussed a lot of things here, and we talked about we're in this win-in scenario and whatever. So first small fix, would it be just an idea to raise the time limit by say 10 minutes to play 1 hour Swiss? Would that solve enough?
I think that'd be a pretty good step in the right direction for sure. The other like from what we have right now, the other thing that I've like been thinking is probably a decent change would be get rid of +3 and do 10 minutes and 10 more
Mhm.
minutes instead. Like overall, the tournaments should be about the same, if not faster, I feel like.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a positive change, even if it is at the sacrifice of +3.
Yeah, and then what you could do as a in the same we could do as in Japan, right? The +0 or 1, depending on who when time is called. You familiar with that one?
For the oh yeah, they just even turns.
Yeah, even turns indeed. So it depends on who
Yeah.
started the game, right? You always make sure everybody had the same number of turns. So you either just finish the turn you're doing right now, or there's one more turn for the other player.
Yeah.
That could
That
also
could be fine as well.
yeah, and that was number one. What about just so the following thing? What about we just play an extra round, like one more on day 2?
Yeah. I mean, then we're going back to where we were, and they've already put us here, so I feel like this is where they want us. And honestly, the from what I've seen so far about the system, like the cutoffs are like it seems like everything like there's a good progression towards uh knowing if you're in the tournament or not in the tournament. And the cool thing about the system actually is you have a set goal, right? X2, you make day 2. We had that last time, but now you pretty much can shoot for X2 to make top 8, which is
Yeah,
or asymmetrical cut at the very least, which is pretty cool. You know the number you need to hit, whereas like last season there's a lot of second guessing and
yeah,
bubbling out, bubbling in, whatever it might be. So now it just makes it solidified. You have a goal you can shoot for, and I really like that, and I want that to stick around. And we start to lose that the more I guess you wouldn't lose it the more rounds you add. I guess you could add
Mhm.
another round in day 2, and I guess maybe I don't know how that would interact with, like, top 16, top 32 finishes, but that would probably help it a little bit, but it
Yeah.
also doesn't seem necessary because, like I said, like, the
Yeah.
X2s are making cut, like,
Mhm.
we have a goal to shoot for. That's, like, kind of good enough for me. I'm sure the players wanna play an extra round, but,
Sure.
that one
People
I'm a little
people
bit
they
more
want to
iffy
get
on.
people want to get value for money, right? And what is value for money? That
Yeah.
is playing. That's what we are paying for at the end of the day, right? No, so I'm feeling like a little more leaning on the no side on this one, at least compared to the other
Yeah.
one. And then I got one more because that's also one I've seen floating around. That is, and that this is more about the prize money for top 32. That they were suggesting we should do something like they do in golf. Are you familiar with how they do prize money in golf?
Yeah, isn't it like if everyone with the same amount of match
Yeah,
points splits the pot, right?
exactly. So suppose that a certain amount of match points is top 32. The player in 30th, 31st, and 32nd, whatever, and it ends up being an additional 5 players or something like that. And then you would just take that prize money and split so it becomes a smaller pot for each of the players. But everybody who reached this number, it sounded the same as asymmetric pricing, right? Asymmetric cut. It is basically just asymmetric pricing.
Yeah.
What about that? How would that feel like in terms of like you sitting there and winning in, and if you lose, at least you always get something.
That one's interesting. It's a little bit weird. I think it would be like a feels good, feels bad depending on the scenario. And I generally like things to be like simple and clean, and that's very, very much not. Basically, just for like the newer player base. I don't know,
Yeah.
feel pretty bad if you're a newer player and then you get top 32. And this is what happen is there'll be some players who just kind of assume from previous seasons or what they've heard that they just walk away with their prize money for getting top 32, and then it's like nope, you actually have to split it with these other 6 people who have the same amount of match points who didn't get top 32. So
Yeah.
yeah, I generally just it just the messier it is, I think the worse it is generally. It would it and it kind of feels like that's just like I don't know. I guess feels good for the people who land on top 32, but I don't love the idea of like you losing your winning and then not ending top 32 either. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of that solution.
No, I can also see it. So I generally agree when we come. So there's two sides to this. You either lose your winning in, you drop out potentially. That feels sort of bad. Or you can come
Yeah,
from the other side, you win, and you maybe get in 32, right? There's from the other point of view as well. You can play up to 32, right?
yeah.
And I've been personally on that side, and I've been number 33. And do a little pop quiz here. So, when you become 33rd at Worlds, what do you get?
Well, I think there was top 64 pricing at this World Championships, but
uh,
prior World Championships, I'm pretty sure it was nothing.
yeah, so just prior, the word is nothing indeed. And, other than, you made it here. Well done. You got 33rd. Well, sorry, I had to have that in as well. But those are some of the things those are the small tweaks. I had some I could also call this following one a hobby horse of mine and whatnot, but it's because I'm very much fan of this. But we could also go in a completely different direction in this, and we can still do the following I'm going to suggest. How would you feel about flights or pots? They're also known as. So suppose you have an incredibly big tournament, or just even 2,000 players, which is not unheard of at all, and you would flight that tournament. The effect of that.
Um, for day 1 or day 2.
I think so. The difference here. So let's first assume you would do it for day one only. That means that you
Yeah.
will get the X2 in each of these two pots, and they will be merged for day two. Let's just assume that for now.
Yeah. One thing I just want to clarify about one of my takes was as far as like the extra round goes in day
Yeah,
2, I'm not against it. It just seems pretty obvious that TPCI doesn't want to do that. So I think we have to come up
yeah.
with like a different solution.
I also
Like,
think I got that. I was just trying to make it lean a little more. Like it was leaning a little more than the first one, but
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
get your take here. So
I'm not again. I wouldn't. I would say if they came out and gave me the option, I'd be like, yeah, sure, give another round to day 2. But
yeah,
I don't think that's what they want. So I think we have to come up with like a different solution that's kind of like a halfway point because they're trying to keep the tournaments smaller or like
yeah,
they're almost like by doing less rounds day 2, going to the true Swiss system. They're like prepping
yeah.
for the potential of a top 32 asymmetrical cut, which will eventually happen.
That
Like even
exactly.
at
That
UIC
exactly.
or NAIC, we could see that this season, depending on what the cap looks like for the players.
And I
So we
think
could
that
see
is
that
the main
happening.
reason. That is actually the main reason they won't add an extra round on day two, because then you end up you don't have much time. You end up having to play
Yeah.
finals at 10 p.m. or something like that, and you don't want that. They want to avoid that. They want to basically be done at a decent time. So you're good here. You're good here, Sul. No worries.
So yeah, for the flights. So I mean, we've done it before in the past. U.S. nationals used to always have 2 flights. I think for maybe except for 1 year, but then even NAIC. I don't know if the the first couple NAICs had flights,
The
but
first one had, because I played as a player, and I remember there was flights. There was 2
okay.
flights. At least
But I
the first one.
remember, yeah, the one immediately post COVID that I won also had flights, and I mean those like it's hard to like think about all the paths to the U.S. Nationals, but those tournaments always seem to run smoothly, and it just kind of makes sense, right? Running a 4,000 person tournament is harder than running 2,000 person tournaments, and we see
Yeah.
this by as tournaments continue to grow and grow and grow. The tournament organizers definitely initially kind of struggle with the new bigger numbers, right? Which is
Yeah.
like reasonable. It's like fair for there to be them, the growing pains for the tournament organizers when there's so many new players getting into the game, right? And the tournaments are so big,
Yep.
which is so that's like fine. But then it does kind of be like, well, why don't we just run like 2 smaller tournaments? It kind of makes sense, I feel like, once we get to a certain point. I don't know what that point is. Maybe at 2,000 players, we should see 2 flights in day one, 1,000 player. Um, Maybe that should be the
I,
cutoff
I,
to
I
open up
actually
the pods.
come to think of it. I think this could be relevant when you otherwise reach the 9 rounds day one. That's the 2,000 something players, right? Because when you flight,
Yeah,
you save a round, right? So suppose you have 2, you go to 1,000 pots instead. You go back and play 8 rounds in day one in each pot instead of 9 rounds in the combined event.
oh, that's true. I didn't even think about how that would interact with the new system. Okay, maybe I
Exactly.
don't like that as much because then that'd be weird because then we have a lot more players day two than there should be. So maybe you actually can't even pod with this
You,
system
that depends,
until you
right?
hit 4,000.
That simply depends. So if we are willing just to say, okay, flighting does not change the number of Swiss rounds, then I think potting is fine in this case, right?
Yeah,
Because then you're just running 2 quicker tournaments, or at least if there is a delay to one side, it wouldn't delay the other ones, right? Suppose table 956 down the line somewhere, they're causing a 30-minute time extension. That time
yeah.
extension would only hurt half the event, not the full event. I know it's still bad that it is there, but it's more such that you saved half the event from running severely overtime because you can run the 2 pots independently.
Yeah, you'd have to like be true to the attendance Swiss number. So like if we have 2,048 players, even if they did get split into 2 pods,
Yeah.
then you would still need to do 9 rounds for each pod. But then it gets a little, I don't know how that looks on the tournament software side of things. Maybe podding only happens when we reach 4,100 players. When we have enough so that if you do split it up, they both will have a true Swiss system 9 rounds when split into 2 different tournaments. So we may have to wait to, and I guess that would be reasonable then. I guess it'd be
Yeah.
like maybe we do have to
Somebody
wait to
could
hit
just
those
try it,
numbers.
right? I could, if I really wanted to, open Tom and just I don't know if that's allowed, so please don't listen, Big Pikachu, if you hear this. But you could just ghost 4,000 players and see how Tom reacts, right? You could just test how it reacts currently.
Yeah.
That's something you can do, of course, and then see. I would assume, my assumption is that if you choose to flight, if you can even do that in a new update, I think you still can. I actually haven't checked, I must be honest. But then I assume you save a round, and then it
Yeah.
becomes interesting, as you said, right? Because suppose we then play 8 rounds, then you get more people in the second day, and then you may go away from that case where X2 makes cut, right?
Yeah. Then it would be weird. I guess like X2 would still probably,
Make cut, but then oh wait,
yeah.
yeah, because maybe they do, and then you just get a much larger asymmetric cut. We approach the limit of 32 instead,
Yeah. It's so
much
weird.
quicker.
It's
Yeah.
actually, yeah, it's so weird. It's almost like the more players actually doesn't equal more players in cut. It's like there's
Oh,
cutoffs
yeah.
based on like the bump because we saw like in, um, I guess it was Dortmund compared to Baltimore. Like there was a more potential in Dortmund for there to be a bigger cut, or there was a bigger cut
Yeah.
at X and two than there was in Baltimore at X and two. And I think both tournaments were at X and two. It's just based on like the number of players compared to the rounds. Because in Dortmund it was 8 rounds day one into 4 rounds, I still believe,
Yeah.
day two. And then
Yeah.
like the Lima special event was super interesting because it was 8 and 2. It was 8 rounds day one, 2 rounds day two.
Yeah.
So they didn't play that much in the second day. But everyone had a potential to make cut. If you went 2-0, if you were X and two and you went 2-0, you made cut from there. So that
and
was still kind of cool
and
to
I
see.
think all these kind of things. This is basically just what if scenarios. Now, what happens if we did this and whatnot. I'm sure that somebody out there will pick it up and run some simulations and or just try it out. I would be very interested in hearing the outcomes of this because it's something I think that really needs to be looked at because there is maybe something we just haven't discovered here yet. That could work out very well, or it could just be let's forget about it and find something else. But final take for now, or final thing I want to ask you, Azul. So, with all the current changes that happened right now, if you were just to compare it to previous season, better or worse, or the same?
I think it has to be worse because I think we have to look from the broad player perspective, and I think
Yeah.
not everyone is super competitive, but everyone wants to like play on the same playing field. So like if I feel like players feel pressured to like want to have to make gentleman's agreement to be able to like compete, like because if you don't make a gentleman's agreement, you're just putting yourself at a disadvantage. And like if you're sitting next to two players and they make gentleman's agreement and your table doesn't, you're just
Yeah.
like strictly you yourself as a player is inherently at a disadvantage in the tournament. So I feel like there's pressure for players to make these gentleman's agreements, and it just, like I said, just feels bad. It has nothing to do with the game of Pokemon. And I know like best two out of 350 minutes does put pressure on the player as well, and that has nothing to do with playing Pokemon, but it feels less so impactful and less restrictive than having to do these gentleman agreements. So I would say it's overall a negative, but there's pros and cons to everything. Like I think a pro is that you know the goal to shoot for to continue to progress in the
Yeah.
tournament. It's X and 2 from day 1 to day 2. It's X and 2 from day 2 to top 8, which is really really nice for the
Yeah.
players because they just know the thresholds to progress. It doesn't quite give you the thresholds for like top 16 and top 32. Those are a little bit more murky still, but like the overall progression into the tournament, you have like a goal to shoot for, which is kind of nice. But I would say overall, I think the new system is probably a negative
Yeah.
because of the gentleman's agreements, kind of the pressure to do them. Now you don't have to do them,
No.
but like I said, you're just putting yourself at a disadvantage, and everyone's just showing up to compete. Even if you're a little bit more casual, you're still showing up to compete. Even if you're a newer player, you still want to like. A lot of players like are trying to get into getting better, right? And if one of those things is having to make gentlemen's agreements, that kind of feels bad.
I think you're on to a lot of good stuff here, and what I think will be interesting to see going forward is how the system would be for players when we reach like truly large tournaments. By that I
Yeah,
mean like I don't know when the first really big event is because it's hard. We have LAIC coming up as the first IC, but it's arguably probably going to be smaller than say EUIC and later
yeah,
NAIC of course. So I think the system is going to be really interesting when we get around to say I think EUIC will be the first one where we really could approach a much higher limit or a much higher number of players. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how the whole thing is going to run when we reach that point. Also in terms from
yeah.
the player's perspective.
I have to imagine that there is an upward limit where X2 no longer makes cut and it
There
becomes
is.
X11. We
I,
have
I
to. That has to get to that point.
I can most fairly say that that's going to happen, like because that's just how it's constructed. But somebody will
Yeah.
probably prove me wrong. But I'm also looking at a certain person out there who loves to simulate stuff. Maybe he would like to go and simulate a few things. You may have an idea who am I reaching out to here, but
Yeah.
maybe run a simulation or two. But the whole idea is, I think there is a limit because we had the same with the tournament system before, and the core idea of the system haven't changed. It's still Swiss. It's still Swiss.
Yeah.
So before you had the whole like I mentioned briefly, like 19 points couldn't reach cut anymore, even if you won out. You were reaching that theoretical threshold, and we even seen people going 5-0-1 on day 2, and then they bubbled cut. And
Yep.
that's of course up there. I'm looking at my brother and having a great time laughing at him because it happened to him. But okay, fair enough. But we can also reach the same. The short message, yes, there should be. I'm fairly certain that there is some upper limit to the system as well for where X2 no longer will be a safe for cut, and you go down to X11.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure if we had. I think if in last year's system, if you went XO, I think for every tournament that happened, except for maybe NAAC or USC, it was close. But I think that everyone made cut at when they went 6-0. But we were definitely close to it. If we like got to like a 3,000 player tournament, I think we would have probably passed it. Where if you made day 2 at X21, you wouldn't have made cut even if you went 6-0.
But then again, behavior now also changed, of course. Behavior
Yeah,
of the
so there will be
players.
like less ties is gonna like make like lessen that problem.
Yeah. So
But
you
yeah,
see
so
that there's some forces pushing this in each direction, right?
yeah,
This is going to be interesting because the behavior of players have changed now because of gentlemen's agreements and number of ties as a consequence of such. So,
yeah,
but no, I think that's enough for today. that can be for another discussion. And with that, I would like to say thank you so much for taking all the time here at late for you, early for me, but I'm glad we could make it work. So
of course.
thank you for joining me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime. And for those of you listening or watching this out there, I hope you enjoyed this class in Stefan's Classroom. And I hope to see you back for another class in Stefan's Classroom. Have a great day, everyone. Bye bye.